The meeting was supposed to be a historic moment, but undercurrents of suspicion and hostility tainted the air. Arthur Miller sat at the central podium reserved for humanity's representative. His tailored black suit and unassuming demeanor masked the dangerous reputation that had followed him through the galaxy's corridors of power. To most in the room, he was simply Earth's chosen diplomat, sent to plead humanity's case for inclusion in the Alliance. But his sharp, calculating eyes and the way he seemed to read the room, like a predator sizing up its prey, hinted at something far more formidable. The council was divided. Some saw humanity as a promising ally, a species that had risen from a cradle of chaos to carve out its place among the stars. Others, like Vrelic the Krell Dominion, viewed humanity as a threat. Vrelic, his towering form clad in ceremonial armor etched with tribal runes, glared at Arthur from across the chamber. His reptilian face betrayed no emotion, but his slitted golden eyes were cold with disdain. Arthur allowed the voices around him to wash over him, his expression unreadable. He had been in rooms like this before, rooms where allegiances shifted like sand and alliances were forged with daggers hidden behind smiles. He leaned back slightly, letting his gaze drift over the council. Some delegates avoided his eyes, while others held his stare just long enough to signal their intent. The patterns of hostility and support were becoming clear. A Trillinade approached Vrelic, whispering something urgent into his ear. The Krell leader's lips curled into what passed for a smirk among his kind. Arthur caught the movement out of the corner of his eye and suppressed a flicker of amusement. Whatever Vrelic was plotting, he was far from subtle. For years, rumors had circulated about the man known as the Baba Yaga, whispers of a human operative who operated in the shadows, dismantling entire operations with surgical precision. Arthur had buried that past, or so he thought, yet it followed him like a shadow. Some on the council dismissed the tales as exaggerated folklore, the kind of myths humans were prone to creating. Others, like Vrelic, likely hoped they were false. The council's presiding arbiter, an aged being of the crystalline Ultran species, struck his staff against the floor to signal order. His voice resonated through the chamber like the toll of a bell. "Representative Miller, the floor is yours." Arthur rose, his movements calm and deliberate, and approached the speaking dais. 1,000 eyes bore into him. Each one a judgment passed before he had even opened his mouth. He adjusted the mic, the faint hiss of feedback silencing the room. "Honorable delegates," he began, his voice carrying a measured weight. "Humanity comes to this council not as conquerors, not as petitioners, but as equals. We seek a place among you not for what we have achieved alone, but for what we can achieve together." As he spoke, Arthur noted the shifting reactions in the crowd. Some nodded, their expressions thoughtful. Others, like Vrelic, seemed unimpressed, their postures stiff with resistance. But Arthur was not here to convince everyone. He only needed to tip the scales. What humanity lacks in longevity, we make up for in resilience, he continued. What we lack in numbers, we make up for in innovation. And what we lack in unity, his lips quirked slightly, a hint of self-awareness that drew a few murmurs from the crowd, we make up for in the strength we find in diversity. Applause broke out from a portion of the chamber, but Vrelic remained still, his piercing gaze locked on Arthur. The human diplomat paused for effect, letting the echoes of clapping fade. "However," Arthur said, his tone sharpening just enough to command attention, "I am not blind to the concerns some of you harbor. You fear humanity's ambition. You question our intentions. And perhaps you doubt our strength." At this, Vrelic shifted in his seat, his taloned fingers drumming against the armrest. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. Arthur let the silence linger, knowing it was as much a weapon as any words he could wield. "Let me assure you," Arthur concluded, his voice steady but with an edge of steel, "humanity is prepared to stand beside this council, not above it. We seek partnership, not dominance. But make no mistake, if forced to defend ourselves, we will not falter." He stepped back, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the room. The presiding arbiter called for a recess, his crystalline form shimmering as he signaled for the delegates to disperse. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of whispers and murmurs as council members clustered into factions, discussing Arthur's speech. Vrelick rose from his seat, towering over his Trillian aide. "He's dangerous," he hissed, his voice low and guttural. "Too dangerous to leave unchecked." The aide hesitated. "Are you certain, my lord?" "The risks." "Spare me your cowardice," Vrelick snapped. "The plan is already in motion." Unaware of the dark machinations unfolding, Arthur made his way to a quiet alcove, or perhaps not entirely unaware. His steps were unhurried, but his senses were on high alert. He could feel the weight of eyes on him, the subtle shifts in the atmosphere that signaled danger. The galaxy was a cruel and treacherous place. Arthur had learned that the hard way, in the cold silence of space and the blood-soaked ruins of forgotten wars. He had left behind the name Baba Yaga when he donned the mantle of diplomacy, but if the galaxy thought him weak because of it, they were mistaken. From the shadows, a figure approached, an aide from the neutral Garrick delegation. Arthur turned slightly, his stance relaxed but ready. The aide bowed and whispered, "There are those who plot against you, Ambassador Miller." Arthur's eyes narrowed, the faintest flicker of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I figured as much," he said softly. "Thank you for confirming it." The aide hesitated. "Do you not wish to alert the council?" Arthur shook his head, his gaze drifting toward the distant figure of Vrelick. "No need. Let them come." The council chamber's lights dimmed as the delegates returned for the next session. But in the shadows of politics and ambition, a storm was brewing. And at its center stood Arthur Miller, calm, composed, and ready for whatever came next. The moment the council reconvened, there was a shift in the air so subtle that only a few might have noticed. Arthur Miller felt it immediately. He remained seated, his posture deceptively casual as the presiding arbiter resumed the proceedings. Around him, the delegates settled into their places, though many cast furtive glances toward him. Vrelick there sat in his assigned position, towering and motionless, his golden eyes gleaming with a quiet malice. Arthur could see the faintest twitch of satisfaction in the alien's jawline, a tell that confirmed his suspicions. The first indication of trouble came when the chamber doors sealed with a heavy hiss. The sound reverberated through the massive room, louder than it should have been, drawing uneasy murmurs from the council members. The presiding arbiter struck his staff against the floor, attempting to restore order, but his crystalline voice was drowned out by a sudden crackling noise. The room's luminescent orbs flickered, and the shimmering blue and gold hues of the walls dimmed to a sickly green. Arthur tilted his head slightly, his sharp eyes scanning the room. His gaze locked briefly with Vrelick's, who now wore an expression of feigned confusion. "That smug bastard," Arthur thought, his lips curving into the faintest ghost of a smile. The predator had set his trap, and now he thought his prey was cornered. A booming voice echoed through the chamber, metallic and distorted. "The time of human arrogance ends here. The representative of Earth will fall tonight." The council erupted into chaos. Delegates cried out in alarm, some scrambling to find cover, while others froze in place. From concealed panels in the walls, heavily armed mercenaries poured into the room. They were a mix of species, their armor matte black, and their weapons glowing faintly with lethal energy. Each moved with precision, their eyes locked onto Arthur as their primary target. Arthur rose slowly, his movements deliberate. He adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket, the picture of calm amidst the storm. "Well," he murmured to no one in particular. They didn't waste time. The first shot rang out, aimed directly at his chest. Arthur sidestepped it with inhuman reflexes, the plasma bolt scorching the air where he'd stood moments before. His right hand darted to his belt, retrieving a sleek, compact device that unfolded into a small energy shield. The next few shots ricocheted harmlessly off its glowing surface. The council chamber became a war zone. Screams echoed as panicked delegates ducked behind their desks or scrambled for the exits, only to find them sealed. The presiding arbiter was hurriedly escorted away by his aides, crystalline shards of his staff clattering to the floor in his haste. But Arthur remained where he was, his focus narrowing to the mercenaries advancing toward him. One of them, a hulking brute with 4 arms, lunged forward with a roar, a glowing blade in each hand. Arthur sidestepped the first strike and ducked under the second, his movements precise and fluid. He grabbed a chair and swung it upward with brutal efficiency, catching the mercenary under the chin. The impact sent the alien sprawling, its blades clattering to the ground. Before it could recover, Arthur picked up one of the blades and drove it into the creature's chest, the glow of the weapon dimming as its wielder slumped lifelessly. The remaining mercenaries hesitated, clearly reevaluating their prey. Arthur straightened, the stolen blade now in his hand. "You'll need to try harder," he said, his voice carrying a deadly calm that sent a ripple of unease through his attackers. They regrouped, spreading out to encircle him. Plasma bolts rained down from all directions, but Arthur moved like a shadow, his body twisting and turning with an almost preternatural grace. He weaved through the chaos, the stolen blade slicing through armor and flesh with surgical precision. Each strike was deliberate, efficient, and final. A smaller, wiry alien charged at him from the side, its serrated weapon aimed at his ribs. Arthur caught its wrist mid-strike, twisting it with a sharp crack. The alien screamed as its weapon fell to the floor. Arthur stepped behind it, using its body as a shield against incoming fire before shoving it into another attacker. In the center of the chamber, Vrelic watched with growing unease. This wasn't the outcome he had anticipated. The human diplomat, no, the human predator, was dismantling his hired killers with an ease that bordered on terrifying. Vrelic's plan had been meticulous, every variable accounted for. And yet here was Arthur Miller, tearing through his forces as if they were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The mercenaries began to falter, their movements less coordinated as panic set in. One of them barked orders in an alien tongue, but the words fell on deaf ears. Arthur capitalized on their disarray, taking down 2 more with swift, brutal efficiency. His suit was spattered with alien blood, his calm demeanor unshaken. As the last of the mercenaries fell, Arthur turned his attention to the single survivor he had deliberately spared, a gangly creature trembling on the floor, its weapon discarded. He knelt beside it, his expression unreadable. "Who sent you?" he asked, his voice soft but laced with an edge that promised no mercy for lies. The mercenary stammered, its eyes darting toward Vrelic before quickly looking away. Arthur followed its gaze, his lips curving into a cold smile. "Ah," he said, standing. "I see." The room had gone eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the chamber's failing lights. The delegates who had taken cover began to emerge, their faces a mix of fear and awe as they stared at Arthur. Some whispered among themselves, the name Baba Yaga passing from mouth to mouth like a secret they could scarcely believe. Arthur dropped the stolen blade and straightened his jacket, his composure as impeccable as if he had just finished a routine diplomatic session. His eyes met Vrelic's across the room, and for the first time, the Krell leader looked truly afraid. Arthur began to walk toward him, each step measured and deliberate. The crowd parted instinctively, their collective gaze fixed on the human who had just transformed their council chamber into a battlefield. Vrelic's guards moved to intercept, but Arthur stopped, raising a single hand. "No need," he said, his tone almost casual. "I'm not here to kill you yet." Vrelic stiffened, his eyes darting toward the chamber's security forces, who were only now breaking through the sealed doors. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The whispers were growing louder, and Vrelic could feel the tide turning against him. Arthur stopped a few feet away, his expression as unreadable as ever. "You made a mistake tonight, Vrelic," he said quietly, "and you won't get another chance." Before the Krell leader could respond, the chamber doors burst open, and armed council guards flooded in. Arthur stepped back, allowing them to secure the room. He didn't need to do anything more. The message had been sent loud and clear. As the guards moved to apprehend the remaining conspirators, Arthur turned and began to walk away. His footsteps echoed in the silent chamber, a stark reminder of the chaos he had just survived, and the chaos he had just unleashed. Arthur Miller leaned against the wall of his quarters, the low hum of the ship's engines a faint, steady rhythm in the background. The council guards had cleaned the blood from the chamber, detained the mercenaries, and restored order. But the real game was far from over. The pieces on the board had shifted, and Arthur knew exactly which one needed to be removed. Vrellic Thar. The evidence had been subtle but undeniable. A trail of encrypted communications, clandestine transfers of galactic credits, and the whispered confessions of a terrified mercenary. Vrellic had orchestrated the assassination attempt, gambling that humanity's diplomat would crumble under pressure. Instead, Arthur had exposed not only the failure of the plot, but also the fragility of Vrellic's own position within the council. Now, it was time to confront the Krell leader. The Krell Dominion's embassy, located in one of the council's outer sectors, was a fortress in all but name. High walls of dark, impenetrable alloys surrounded the compound, guarded by sentries who patrolled with precision. Arthur approached the gates under the cover of night, his steps silent, his movements fluid. No alarm sounded, no guard spotted him. By the time the sentries realized something was wrong, he was already inside. The corridors were dimly lit, their metallic surfaces gleaming faintly under pale strips of light. Arthur moved through them with purpose, his mind running through every possible scenario. He didn't need to kill Vrellic, not yet. What he needed was leverage, something that would ensure the Krell's downfall without implicating himself in a direct confrontation. He reached Vrellic's private chambers with ease. The doors, massive and engraved with the intricate symbols of the Krell Dominion, slid open with a hiss as Arthur bypassed their security system. Vrellic stood inside, his back to the door, gazing out of a floor-to-ceiling viewport that overlooked the distant stars. He didn't turn around, but his voice was sharp and venomous. "I knew you'd come," Vrellic said, his golden eyes reflected faintly in the viewport's glass. "I underestimated you, human. That was a mistake I won't make again." Arthur stepped into the room, his expression calm, but his gaze unyielding. "Underestimating me wasn't your only mistake, Vrellic. You tried to kill a diplomat in front of the entire council. Did you really think no one would notice?" Vrellic turned, his towering frame casting a long shadow across the room. "You speak of the council as if they matter," he sneered. "They're spineless bureaucrats clinging to their petty alliances. They fear strength and humanity. Your kind has shown far too much of it." Arthur tilted his head slightly, his lips curving into a faint, humorless smile. "And yet it wasn't strength that exposed your plan. It was arrogance. Sloppy, reckless arrogance." The Krell leader's claws flexed, his golden eyes narrowing. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? That your victories make you invincible. But you're alone here, Miller. No guards, no allies. Just you and me." Arthur took a step closer, his movements deliberate. "And yet, I'm still standing here, while your mercenaries are rotting in council custody. Do you know what they told me, Vrellic? They told me everything." For the first time, hesitation flickered across Vrellic's face. It was brief, but Arthur caught it. He pressed on, his voice low and even. "You've made enemies, Vrellic. Not just me, not just humanity, but others on the council. They see you for what you are, a relic of a dying empire. They'd turn on you in a heartbeat if it meant saving themselves." Vrellic's jaw tightened, his claws scraping against the armrest of a nearby chair. "You think you can threaten me? I am Vrellic Thar, the Krell Dominion. My people have ruled the stars for centuries. Your kind is nothing but a fleeting nuisance." Arthur raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by the outburst. "Rhetoric won't save you, Vrellic. The council already suspects you. All it would take is a single push, a single revelation, and they'd dismantle your power base before you could blink." Vrellic growled low in his throat, a sound that rumbled through the room like distant thunder. "And what do you want, Miller? Why are you here?" Arthur took another step forward, his gaze never leaving Vrelix. I'm here to give you a choice. You can withdraw your opposition to humanity's membership in the Council publicly and unequivocally, or I can release the evidence I've gathered, every encrypted message, every credit transfer, every detail of your plot. The choice is yours. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and oppressive. Vrelix's eyes burned with a mix of rage and calculation as he weighed his options. Arthur could see the gears turning in the Krell's mind, the struggle between pride and survival. Finally, Vrelix straightened, his expression hardening. You think this will end with me stepping aside? That the galaxy will welcome humanity with open arms? You're deluded, Miller. You may win this battle, but the war is far from over. Arthur allowed a small, cold smile to break through his composed demeanor. You're right, Vrelix. The war is far from over. But let me make one thing clear. You've already lost this fight. He turned and began to walk away, his steps echoing through the chamber. As he reached the door, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder. Choose wisely, Vrelix. The Council won't give you a second chance, and neither will I. The door slid shut behind him, leaving Vrelix alone in the dimly lit room. For a long moment, the Krell leader stood motionless, his claws clenching and unclenching as he stared out at the stars. Somewhere in the depths of his mind, the weight of his defeat began to settle. Arthur, meanwhile, made his way back through the embassy, slipping past the guards with the same ease as before. The night air greeted him as he stepped outside, cool and crisp against his skin. He didn't allow himself the luxury of relief. There was still work to be done, alliances to solidify, and enemies to outmaneuver. As he disappeared into the shadows, a single thought lingered in his mind, a quiet, unshakable certainty. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for far too long. That was about to change. The Council chamber was unrecognizable. What once served as the epicenter of intergalactic diplomacy now bore the marks of battle. Smoke hung thick in the air, mingling with the acrid scent of scorched metal and plasma fire. Broken columns and shattered consoles littered the vast room, casting jagged shadows under the flickering remnants of the chamber's once pristine lights. Arthur Miller stepped over the debris, his eyes scanning the chaos with cold precision. The quiet murmurs of betrayal that had simmered over weeks had finally boiled over. The attack on him had been the tipping point, a catalyst for the larger storm that had swept through the Council. Factions had risen and fallen in the span of hours, alliances shattered like fragile glass. Vrelix desperation had ignited a chain reaction, and now the galaxy's most powerful leaders were tearing each other apart. A sharp crack echoed from the far side of the chamber as a blast of plasma narrowly missed Arthur, scorching the floor near his feet. He turned, his reflexes honed, and fired back with deadly accuracy. The Krell soldier who had taken the shot crumpled to the ground, his weapon clattering beside him. Arthur moved forward, each step deliberate, his expression carved from stone. He wasn't just surviving the chaos, he was shaping it. The Council chamber had become a war zone, but Arthur wasn't here to flee. He was here to end it. Vrelix's forces had entrenched themselves on the far side of the chamber, their black and gold armor marking them as loyal to the Krell Dominion. The opposing faction, a loose coalition of disgruntled council delegates and their personal guards, had taken positions among the rubble. It was a stalemate, each side unwilling to yield, their hatred for one another matched only by their fear of the man who now walked between them. Arthur reached the center of the room, where the presiding arbiter's shattered podium lay in ruins. He stepped onto the platform, his figure silhouetted against the flames that licked at the edges of the chamber. His voice cut through the cacophony like a blade. Enough! The fighting paused, weapons lowered but not holstered. Dozens of eyes turned toward him, a mix of fear, awe, and resentment. Even Vrelix, standing amidst his remaining soldiers, froze in place. The Krell leader's golden eyes locked onto Arthur, burning with fury. "This is what you become," Arthur demanded, his voice rising. The galaxy's greatest powers reduced to squabbling children, tearing each other apart, while the real threat looms beyond these walls. Vrellick stepped forward, his towering frame imposing even from a distance. "You dare to lecture us, human," he snarled. "You, who brought this chaos upon us. This is your doing." Arthur turned to face him fully, his gaze unwavering. "No, Vrellick, this is your doing. You lit the match. I'm just making sure the fire burns out before it consumes us all." Vrellick growled, his claws flexing. "You think you can stop this? You think you can win?" He gestured to the soldiers at his back. "I hold the power here. Not you, not the Council, and certainly not humanity." Arthur tilted his head, a faint, icy smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You've already lost, Vrellick. You just don't know it yet." As if on cue, the chamber's massive doors groaned open, revealing a battalion of council guards clad in silver armor. They moved with military precision, their weapons trained on Vrellick's forces. At their head stood Commander Ryvek, a grizzled veteran with a reputation for loyalty to the council's ideals. His arrival was no coincidence. Arthur had ensured it. "Stand down, Vrellick," Ryvek commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "This ends now." For a moment, the room teetered on the edge of chaos. Vrellick's soldiers glanced nervously between their leader and the advancing guards. The coalition forces tightened their grips on their weapons, ready to pounce at the slightest provocation. Arthur stepped forward, his voice low, but carrying the weight of inevitability. "Surrender, Vrellick. Your soldiers don't want to die for a cause that's already failed. You can end this now, or you can drag them down with you." Vrellick's jaw tightened, his golden eyes darting around the room. He could see it. The wavering loyalty of his troops, the calculating stares of his enemies, and the unyielding resolve in Arthur's gaze. The Krell leader's claws scraped against his palms as he struggled to contain his rage. Finally, with a low, guttural growl, he raised a hand. "Stand down," he barked to his soldiers. "Lower your weapons." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the chamber as the tension broke. Vrellick's forces hesitated, then complied, their weapons clattering to the floor. The council guards moved swiftly, disarming and detaining them. Commander Ryvek approached Arthur, his expression grim but respectful. "It's over," Ryvek said. "For now." Arthur nodded, his eyes still fixed on Vrellick. The Krell leader stood rigid, his defeat a palpable weight on his shoulders. But Arthur knew this wasn't the end. Men like Vrellick didn't disappear quietly. They festered, plotting in the shadows, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. As the guards escorted Vrellick away, the remaining delegates began to emerge from their hiding places, their faces pale and drawn. They looked to Arthur, the man who had turned the tide, their expressions a mix of gratitude and trepidation. Arthur stepped back onto the shattered podium, his voice carrying across the chamber once more. "This isn't victory," he said, his tone measured but firm. "This is survival. If we continue down this path, there won't be a council left to save. We need unity, not division. Strength, not fear. The galaxy is watching, and it won't forgive us if we fail." The room fell silent, his words hanging heavy in the air. One by one, the delegates nodded, their fear giving way to a fragile determination. The battle had ended, but the war for the council's future was just beginning. Arthur turned and left the chamber, his steps purposeful as he disappeared into the corridors beyond. The scars of the conflict would remain, etched into the walls and the memories of those who had survived. But amidst the ruins, there was a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild, stronger and more united than before. And in the shadows, Arthur Miller, the so-called Baba Yaga, prepared for the battles yet to come.